Hi, welcome to Psych Takeaway, where we look at current events and try to make sense of them from a psychological point of view. Ralph, I think we should talk a little bit about last week. I think we might have confused some of our listeners with the difference between asocial and antisocial.
Yeah, and I think that was my bad since I started talking about antisocial as if it was asocial. So let's reiterate the definitions.
Okay, so asocial refers to a person or people who just do not enjoy the interaction with others. Doesn't mean that they're bad people or that they're manipulative or that they're crazy. It's just that means that given an opportunity to interact or given an opportunity to not interact, they will choose the second.
So would it be safe to say, Jim, that some introverts are asocial, but not all introverts are asocial?
Right. I mean, an introvert could be quite interested in other people, just kind of shy around them. So, so just the behavioral thing is whether or not the person prefers to interact with people or not. And this can be played out in a number of different ways. Suppose you're choosing an occupation. Well, if you weren't a people person, then you probably would not choose an occupation like, used car salesman.
Okay.
You might be more of a lab person.
Or even a mechanic if you liked cars, but you didn't want to interact with a lot of people.
Yeah, with the customers, yeah. Now, antisocial is a little bit different. Antisocial individuals may be quite extroverted. They enjoy working with and dealing with and interacting with other people. But there's a hook here. They also are very, very self-involved, egocentric, and use people and misuse people to their own advantages. I don't know if we have a good example of this around. Without going into the political arenas, I can't think of anybody like that. But people who are perhaps in high-profile positions where they have to make decisions and are propelling themselves up some kind of corporate ladder may actually have antisocial tendencies.
Yeah, so, we've seen this in a lot of films where the guy who is climbing the corporate ladder is quite willing to step on the face of the guy who's climbing up behind him in order to get one rung ahead.
Yeah, I think the character of Gecko in, I think it's Wall Street. Yeah, Wall Street is the name of the film.
Yeah.
Is a good example of this. And I suppose if you take a look at gangster films, I think the Godfather series is replete with people who have antisocial characteristics. Okay, so we hope that clears that one up. Now, we were going to talk about unconscious versus subconscious in terms of implicit bias today, but something's coming up, Ralph, and I'd like to throw it out to our listeners. What do you know about the 25th Amendment to the American Constitution?
Well, the 25th Amendment, Jim, is kind of an interesting thing because what it basically says is that if someone who occupies the office of the president is incapacitated through either physical or mental disability, and it was designed, for example, somebody who had a stroke which left them comatose.
Okay.
They can be replaced through the 25th Amendment. Now, there is a series of replacements. For example, the president who became incapacitated could be replaced under the 25th Amendment by the vice president.
Okay.
And then by the Speaker of the House.
Okay.
And then and there's a chain of about 50 people who, in descending order, could take over the presidency. Now,
this is the theme of the Jack Ryan series. He's a relatively low-level political person in Washington, but everybody's been wiped out, and he ends up being president, right?
Yeah,
Okay.
and that was also one of the things that the 25th Amendment was put in place for, because it was put in place at a time when we were really worried about a nuclear strike taking out the entire top level of the political sphere.
Okay. Now, the reason I brought this up today, Ralph, is that people are talking about the political race that's going on right now. The Republicans have just had their convention. The Democrats will have their convention. Donald Trump has been nominated by the Republicans, and it would seem that Joe Biden is going to be nominated by the Democrat Party. But that is not for sure a given. It's not in concrete or stone.
Not yet.
Yeah. And people are concerned about his cognitive ability.
Yeah, and there are a number of things. I mean, Biden as a political figure has been around for about 50 years in politics, and he has always been prone to making misstatements or gaffes.
Uh-huh.
And he's gotten worse at this.
Yeah.
So some of his gaffes are, getting pretty awful. He called
Trump
Kamala Harris. He called Vice President Trump the other day in a presentation.
Yeah. So we have not seen all of the machinations of Joe Biden's slippage, but I guess some of the political folks have, and they're now calling for him to step down as the running candidate. Thank you, Ralph.
And who then would be the replacement? Well, the logical figure in terms of party politics would be Kamala Harris.
Yeah. Now, if Joe decides not to step down, could the 25th Amendment be invoked?
Well, and that's a good question, Jim, and I don't really know the answer to that, because to what extent does the president have to be incapacitated before he cannot serve?
Right.
So
Woodrow Wilson was bedridden, and apparently his wife did a lot of his work for him, and I think that was a kind of a motivator for getting the 25th Amendment in place back in the 60s.
In the day, yeah. And the thing that a lot of people, even today, don't realize is that the President Roosevelt, not Teddy Roosevelt, but Franklin Roosevelt, had been stricken with polio in his 30s and was in a wheelchair for his entire 3 terms.
Mm-hmm. And he hit it well, apparently.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
what would we say today? Well, having had polio shouldn't have caused him to be disqualified as being, disabled.
Disabled,
But,
yeah.
And even President Trump, or former President Trump, has been criticized for his emotional instability. But we were reading an article just a few minutes ago, and the gist of it was that, although former President Trump might have some unlikable characteristics, he is not, by definition, seriously emotionally disturbed.
Yeah. You can argue correctly that he's not a very nice, likable person.
No.
And, we tend to say that one of the things that makes American presidents is they're affable. They're very affable.
Mm-hmm.
And Trump is not.
Right.
But that doesn't necessarily mean that he's got a screw loose or several screws loose.
Yeah, apparently. I'm trying to think back. In the 2017 or so, pre-pandemic, they called upon him to take a cognitive test. And apparently he did. And I can remember him saying, I passed.
Yeah.
Got the
Yeah.
highest score ever.
Yeah.
Just,
And, the thing is, okay, so he's not a very nice, likable person. He's not affable, but he is apparently mentally competent and capable of making good distinctions.
yeah.
Now, the thing with Mr. Biden is it's widely known that you cannot ask him to do very much of anything after about 8 o'clock at night because he goes to bed.
Well, we've talked about sleep before on this podcast. That's a very wise thing to do, to get a good night's sleep.
Yeah.
However, if you're president of the United States, things happen in other parts of the globe at 8 o'clock at night, right?
Right. And so if something happens in Taiwan and, it's 11 o'clock at night our time.
I can imagine waking you up at 11 o'clock at night, Ralph. It'd be pretty ugly. What?
Yeah, and it would be give me 3 pots of coffee and I'll give you an answer. But the thing is that, if you say, well, characteristics like napping in the afternoon, going to bed early, and not being able to work 12 or 15-hour day are bars to being president of the United States, in addition to having habitual characteristics like misspeaking, misidentifying, unable to remember names or events clearly. Can you say at this point that's a 25th Amendment liability?
Yeah, I don't know. I wonder, would they bring in a psychologist or a psychiatrist to do this diagnosis, or is it going to be done just by members of the Democrat Party?
I think the answer is it's either going to be done by Biden himself, who says, I'm not going to run for another term.
Okay, so it would be taking himself out of the
equation. Or by the party, who says, not this is a 25th Amendment issue necessarily, but who says you can't win.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And above all, political parties want to elect winners.
Yeah, okay.
So they say, Mr. Biden, you can't win. So
let's find somebody who can.
Let's find somebody who can. And part of the problem right now for the Democratic Party is that it doesn't look immediately like they have really strong candidates to replace Mr. Biden.
Okay. All right. But you're saying your guess is that they're not going to go the 25th Amendment route. They've got, 6 months that they have to put up with Mr. Biden.
Yeah,
right?
and they've got basically until August the 4th for Biden to recuse himself and say, I'm not going to run again.
Yeah, for the good of the country, right?
For the good of the country, the good of the party even.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And in that case, then we look at who are the logical people. Well, first of all, Kamala Harris, because she's best positioned to slide the...
she's already on the ticket, Ralph. So,
yeah.
Everyone thinks, okay, it's going to be Kamala Harris now, and then in 4 years, she'll be running as president, right?
Right.
Okay, that's a scenario.
But the thing is that all the major polls say that she cannot win against President Trump, or former President Trump.
Right.
So then what do? Do you say, okay, well, we knock out the Kamala. President, he withdraws, then we have the VP, she withdraws, and then who do we go for? Well, there's 2 scenarios here. You can have what's called an open convention, where all the Democratic electors get together and basically say, at the end of the infighting, here's who we choose.
Okay.
Or you can have a closed convention where basically you come into the convention and a number of people have already selected a candidate
Uh-huh.
who they have to vote for. They're committed on the
On the
first round.
first round, first ballot.
So they vote for that candidate. There's a winner. Okay, we're settled. There's no winner.
Uh-huh.
Second round becomes, again, like an open convention. You can vote for anybody.
You know, it's kind of interesting, Ralph. You know, you and I are both Canadians, but we lived across the river from the United States, and we were able to get a lot of American, radio. And I can remember listening to both Republican and American and Democrat conventions, and being fascinated by the roll calls and the intrigue of backroom stuff.
Yeah.
Politicians smoking cigars and making decisions that affect the country.
Yeah.
Out of vision.
And those of you who are old enough might be able to think back to 1968 when the Democrats had their convention in Chicago, and it was an open convention at that time.
That was a zoo.
That was a zoo. I mean, there were riots in the streets. It was, summer of love, hippies, blah, blah, blah. And
fire hoses.
Fire
hosing down
hoses,
the delegates.
and I don't know that if the Democrats have an open convention this time around, it will be anything like that.
It's interesting. The conventions are going to be in Chicago, Ralph.
Yeah.
Well,
so are we 1968 deja vu all over again, or do we have a more circumspect?
Okay, so the question out there right now is, is Joe Biden going to be replaced via Amendment 25? And our consensus is no, he isn't. But will Joe run as the Democrat presidential candidate? That seems to be pretty much up in the air at the present time.
Yeah, and I guess my take, given everything we've seen so far, is that for the good of the country, the decision should be made for the good of the country.
Okay, yeah. So we'll let it go at that. Oh, by the way, we've asked our listeners to buy us a coffee. We're out of coffee, Ralph. We have no coffee today. So, hey, we're going to put that up also in our notes. Buy the boys a coffee.
Okay.
Okay.
And
now, we'll
the
get
other
back.
thing to remind you listeners of is that we do offer CE credits. Any of you who are in the end of nursing training or counselor training or psychology training who are thinking, I'm going to go out into the world at the end of the next semester and I'm going to get my license, you might want to get a leg up on getting your CE credits for licensure by signing on to one of our license LARA accepted credits for
We've got
human trafficking and
implicit bias, record keeping, social media awareness. And so we've got that whole list, and it's here on the kind of what do we call them? The liner notes.
Yeah.
Well, this was kind of a diversion from what we had planned. We had planned on talking about unconscious versus subconscious,
which we will do next podcast.
Yes. And so we hope we clarified antisocial versus asocial, and we hope we didn't muddy it too much talking about the 25th Amendment.
No, it's a legacy from when we thought we were going to be all obliterated in the 60s, at least in terms of Washington and the political animals.
Yeah. Okay, so as usual, this is Jim.
and Ralph,
saying, keep your stick on the ice.
because we're all in this
Together.